With me now is Ben Wittes, editor-in-chief of Lawfare, senior fellow at Brookings Institute, and of course, an MSNBC legal analyst. Executive privilege. This is going to be a phrase we're going to hear, I think, a lot over the next 3 months. The Mueller report, it seems like we have two battles here. One will be the Mueller, what's in it, but first will be the battle to see what's in it. How much is this Nixon tapes redux?
So it's not going to be Nixon tapes redux because the fight is not going to be the prosecutor versus the president. The fight is going to be the president versus Congress. And that actually, the president is in a stronger position in that context with respect to executive privilege. But it is going to be a battle royal if the president wants it to be. Mueller, assuming all these stories are accurate, Mueller will file his report, and then we will have an immediate battle over whether and how much of that report gets made public. And that's going to be a pretty intense thing.
Rudy Giuliani seemed to think that they're going to get an early look at it. And he said that the president's lawyers have made clear to Justice Department officials that they want to see Mueller's completed report before the department decides what to share with Congress, because the aim is a chance to argue whether they believe some parts should remain private under executive privilege. Is that illegal? I mean, I know technically the White House oversees the Justice Department. They could actually see this Mueller report before Justice makes a decision.
So, again, you know, what's legal, what's constitutionally within the president's power, and what's proper are not really the same thing here, right? The president has the power to direct the conduct of the Justice Department. Is it appropriate for the president to be, and his lawyers, to be reviewing a law enforcement action before it is the Justice Department decides what to do with it? In my opinion, absolutely not. Rudy Giuliani and I don't see eye to eye about a lot of matters of propriety around these questions.
Are we going to see Democrats look for weird ways to try to, quote, get this into the public record? Are we going to see like a Pentagon Papers moment? Are we going to see somebody reading it into the congressional record or trying to enter it in? Is that the kind of tactics that congressional Democrats might have to use if they get into this, if they lose the court fight?
So I think there's an antecedent question that we should ask before that, which is how Mueller is going to write the report. Because, you know, he is in the same position as the rest of us, which is to say he's read the Washington Post this morning and knows that the White House is gearing up to fight him on these grounds. He knows everything we know, and he also knows a whole lot more, which is what's going to be in the report. Now, if you were Bob Mueller under those circumstances, here's something you might think about doing. You might think about taking all the material that is plausibly covered by executive privilege, all the material that's plausibly classified, all the material that is plausibly covered by grand jury secrecy, and summarizing it in an executive summary that is not plausibly covered by any of those things. And then when you issue your report, when you send your report, the public statement that you issue simply mentions that you have a detailed report and an executive summary that has been scrubbed of all that information. Congress then goes after the executive summary first.
Is there also, you know, there had been some, I would call it informed speculation that many of these legal filings are actually little pieces, the narratives of these legal filings are actually the beginnings of the Mueller report itself. If you start putting them all together, that you can actually start to see the narrative that he's going to draw. So is it possible that the report, basically, if he has to, he can put some of the stuff that he's most concerned about getting covered up in a court filing?
So there's certainly that possibility, but I think there's another possibility, too, which is, you know, we all assume that Bob Mueller is going to write a report that is factually rich and is going to tell us the whole story, right? And that's really conditioned in our minds by the Starr report. You know, Bob Mueller may not see that as the mission here. The regulation under which he's serving doesn't say what kind of report he's supposed to write. And so maybe he's going to write a very spare report that just says, I brought 38 cases, you know, I submitted 800 subpoenas, I talked to this number of witnesses. You could imagine a very restrained report that really doesn't consider it his job to tell us the whole story of what happened.
All right, let me posit another theory then. What if the report's in his head and he just simply is subpoenaed to testify before Congress?
So that is, I think, a really important possibility and is one of the ultimate weapons that Mueller has. So executive privilege is a great mechanism for the president for a witness who doesn't want to testify and wants an excuse or a plausible legal basis to say, I'm not going to answer your questions to Congress. As Jim Comey showed, it is a terrible mechanism to prevent somebody who wants to testify. Because there was a lot of talk. Would the president assert executive privilege when Comey was going to testify?
Right.
And Comey's position was, you can assert whatever you want. I'm going to tell the story of what happened in my interactions with the president.
Would this lead to a lawsuit? Let's say Mueller's subpoenaed to testify, and essentially the report is in his head, depending on the questioning that comes forward. The White House says, asserts executive privilege. Does that immediately then go to the Supreme Court?
No, I think it's really ultimately Matt Mueller can show up the next day under subpoena, and unless there's an injunction, he can testify in response to their questions.
So the president or the White House counsel would have to actually go to court and seek an injunction to prevent the testimony.
And nothing like that has ever happened before. So I think Mueller's ultimate weapon here is the ability to go and do that.
We've just outlined the Mueller report's going to be public. There is no way this thing gets squashed.
I believe that if there is material that Mueller wants to make public, he can write a report in a fashion that will make it public. He can, Congress can litigate from the executive to make key portions public, and ultimately Bob Mueller can go talk about his findings.
And that's the most important weapon he has
Yes.
in the arsenal. Ben Wittes, as always, sir, thanks for making sense of this.
Good to see you.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.